My son pushed me from our boat 10 miles from shore and told me to say hello to the sharks. He thought it was the perfect crime that the ocean would swallow his secret and leave him a rich man. He didn't know his father. He didn't know what I was capable of. And when he returned to my home that evening, ready to claim his inheritance, I was waiting for him. I looked him in the eye and said, "I have a gift for you too." Before I tell you what happened next, please let me know where you're listening to this story from in the comments below. And if you've ever had to prove someone wrong who underestimated you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories. The Florida sun was a merciless white orb in the sky, baking the August air until it shimmered. The sea was as flat as glass, the surface broken only by the gentle silver ripples of a light breeze. My boat, the Isabel, cut cleanly through the turquoise water, its engine humming a steady, sleepy rhythm. 10 miles out from the coast, the land was just a hazy, dark green smudge on the horizon. Out here, there was only the sound of the engine, the distant cry of a gull, and the profound silence of the open ocean. It should have been a perfect day for fishing. I was rigging a new lure, my old but steady fingers working with the practiced efficiency of a lifetime on the water. My son Mitchell sat across from me, nursing a half-empty can of beer. He wore a pair of expensive sunglasses that hid the top half of his face, and he was smiling. But his smiles never quite reached his eyes. I'd learned to see the difference years ago. "You sure you don't need more sunscreen, Dad?" he asked, his voice slick with a practiced concern that felt hollow. "The sun is brutal today." "I'm fine," I said, not looking up from my task. "My skin is used to it." "Just worried about you," he continued, taking a sip of his beer. "You're 71 now. Gotta be careful." I gave a slight nod, tying the final knot, and casting my line out into the deep. The soft whir of the reel was a comforting, familiar sound. I didn't want to talk about my age. Age is just a number. What matters is what you've done with your years, and I had done a lot. We sat in silence for a moment. I watched my bright orange bobber dance on the surface. Mitchell was restless, his eyes darting around as if he was searching for something he'd lost. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. "So, Dad," he began, and I knew exactly what was coming. This was the real reason for our trip. "I spoke with those guys from the Vesta group again yesterday." I didn't answer. I just stared at my bobber, wishing a fish would bite and spare me from this conversation. The ocean was not on my side today. "They're really serious about the property, Dad." Mitchell pressed on, his voice now filled with a false enthusiasm. "They made a new offer. The number, it's life-changing. It's enough for all of us to never have to worry about anything ever again. Kendall and the kids would be set for life." I let out a long, slow breath. This again. The talk of money, of the future, of being set for life. The words Mitchell always used to disguise his own bottomless greed. "My answer is the same, Mitchell," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "We're not selling." "But why?" he whined, the sound grating. "It's just an empty lot and an old house. You don't even live there full time. It's just sitting there, wasting its potential." I turned to look at him then for the first time all morning. I took off my old frayed baseball cap and wiped the sweat from my brow. "It's not just an empty lot, Mitchell. It's where your mother and I built everything from nothing. Every single sea grape tree in that yard was planted by her own 2 hands. That porch is where I asked her to marry me. It isn't some asset for you to put a price tag on." I could see the flash of anger behind his sunglasses. "Mom's been gone for 10 years, Dad. She would want us to be happy. She would want her son and her grandchildren to have a comfortable life. Your mother," I countered, my own voice sharpening, "would want us to honor her legacy. She would never trade those memories for a pile of cash from some corporation that wants to bulldoze it all for another soulless resort for the rich." "That cash isn't soulless," Mitchell snapped, shooting to his feet and making the boat rock. "It's opportunity. It's freedom." You don't get it because you were never ambitious. You were always content with your small old life. His words were like tiny sharp knives, small and old. That's how he saw the life I had built, the life Isabel and I had cherished together. The life of a Marine, a husband, a father. He had reduced it all to those two words. I am content with what I have, I said, turning away to look out at the sea again. That's something you'll never understand, Mitchell. You always want more. Nothing is ever enough for you. A heavy silence fell between us, more suffocating than the Florida heat. I could feel his stare burning into the back of my neck. I knew I had pushed him to his limit. We had this same argument a dozen times over the last 6 months, each one more bitter than the last. But something felt different today. There was a tension in the air so thick you could almost taste it. I decided to end it. I started reeling in my line. That's enough. We're heading back. No, Mitchell said. His voice was cold. I paused, turning back to face him. He had sat down, but his body was rigid. What did you say? I said we're not going back until you agree to be reasonable, he stated. I let out a short, harsh laugh. You don't get to make demands on my boat, son. Maybe it's not your boat anymore, he whispered, but the words were perfectly clear. A chill ran down my spine, defying the searing heat. I stood up to face him fully. What did you just say to me? Mitchell stood up too. Now without the fake smile, his face was that of a stranger. Greedy, cruel, and desperate. I said, he repeated, his voice a low snarl, that you are in the way. You are an obstacle to this family's future. This family, I demanded, my voice trembling with rage. The family that I raised you in, that I educated you in, that I bailed you out of debt for time and time again, you call me an obstacle. Yes, he shouted, spit flying from his mouth. A stubborn, selfish obstacle clinging to the past. You don't care about us. You only care about that house, about a ghost. The argument had reached its peak. All restraint was gone. My answer is no, I said, my voice like steel. As long as I am alive, that house will stand. You will never get it. It was a mistake. I had said the fateful words. The look on Mitchell's face changed completely. The hot anger vanished, replaced by a terrifying calm, a cold clarity in his eyes. So the problem is, as long as you're alive, is it? Before my 71-year-old brain could fully process the monstrous meaning of that question, before my body could react, he lunged. He wasn't an angry son anymore. He was a force of nature, fueled by desperation and greed. The strength of a 40-year-old man easily overpowered me. I felt a tremendous, violent shove in my chest. My feet left the deck. The world became a blur of blue sky, sparkling sea, and the blank, emotionless face of my own son. My world turned upside down. I hit the water with a heavy splash. The shock of the cold and the surprise of the attack forced all the air from my lungs. I surfaced, sputtering and choking, gasping for breath. The salt of the ocean burned my throat. When my vision cleared, I saw Mitchell standing on the boat looking down at me. There was no remorse, no panic, only cold, hard calculation. He didn't even shout. He just said, his voice calm and ghastly, loud enough for me to hear across the few yards of water that separated us. Say hello to the sharks. Then he turned, walked calmly to the helm and started the engine. The motor roared to life. The Isabel, the boat named for my beloved wife, turned in a wide arc and began to speed away back toward the shore. I was left behind. All around me was an endless expanse of blue. Above me, the vast, empty sky. Below me, the deep, dark abyss. I watched the boat shrink to a white speck on the massive canvas of the sea until it disappeared completely over the horizon. Then there was only me and the silence of the ocean, 10 miles from shore. Alone. The first thing that hit me was the silence. One moment the world was filled with the roar of a boat engine and the furious shouting of my son. The next, there was nothing. only the gentle slap of small waves against my body and the whisper of the wind. The engine sound faded from a roar to a buzz, and then it was gone, swallowed by the immense emptiness of the sea. I was treading water, my clothes suddenly feeling impossibly heavy, pulling me down. The cold was a shock, a physical blow that seemed to seep straight into my bones, a stark contrast to the blistering sun that was still beating down on my head and face. I turned in a slow circle, my heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs. Nothing. In every direction, the horizon was a perfect, unbroken line, where the brilliant blue of the sky met the deep, dark blue of the ocean. I was the only thing in sight. A single, insignificant speck floating in an endless world of water. The boat was gone. Mitchell was gone. It was a sight so desolate, so utterly final, that my mind struggled to accept it. This couldn't be real. Sons don't do this. They don't look their fathers in the eye and then leave them to die in the middle of the ocean. But the cold water was real. The salty taste in my mouth was real. The burning betrayal in my chest was the most real thing of all. It was a pain far sharper than the cold, a wound deeper than the ocean beneath me. I thought of a little boy with sandy hair, maybe 5 years old, holding my hand on the dock and looking up at me with absolute trust in his eyes. "You'll always keep me safe, right, Daddy?" he had asked. I had promised him I would. Where did that boy go? How did he become the monster who had just sped away without a backward glance? A wave of despair, cold and heavy, washed over me. I was 71 years old. I was 10 miles from shore with no life vest and no hope of rescue. The odds weren't just bad, they were non-existent. For the first time, the sheer crushing reality of my situation began to sink in. He had done it. My son had murdered me. He had just left the ocean to finish the job. A profound and terrible exhaustion took hold of me, a desire to simply stop kicking, to let the heavy water pull me under and end the pain. I was alone, utterly and completely alone. Just as my muscles began to give in to the sweet siren call of exhaustion, a voice echoed in my head. It was a voice I hadn't heard in 50 years, a gravelly roar that could cut through steel. It was Gunnery Sergeant McKinnon, my drill instructor at Camp Pendleton, a man made of leather and fury. I was 19 again, shivering in the cold Pacific, during a night training exercise, my body screaming for me to quit. "Pain is just a feeling, Hayes," he had screamed, his face inches from mine. "Feelings leave. Survival is forever. Now you get your head right and you fight." That memory, sharp and brutal, was like a jolt of electricity to my soul. The despair didn't vanish, but a wall of iron slammed down in my mind, locking it away in a dark room. There would be time for grief later. There would be time for rage. Right now, there was only time for the mission, and the mission was to live. The first step was to breathe. Panic makes you gasp. Gasping wastes oxygen and energy. I closed my eyes and focused, forcing my ragged breaths into a slow, steady rhythm. Inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 4. It was a technique from drown-proofing training drilled into us in a cold, dark pool until it became second nature. They held us under until our lungs burned, teaching us that the body's first enemy isn't the water, it's the panic in your own mind. I could feel my frantic heartbeat begin to slow, the terror receding to a manageable hum in the background. My mind started to clear. Next, the weight. My work boots felt like anchors. My denim jeans were saturated, clinging to my legs like a lead blanket. Sergeant McKinnon's voice barked in my memory again. "Weight is a death sentence, ladies. The ocean will use anything it can to drag you down to hell. Travel light, or you won't travel at all." I took a deep breath, dipped under the surface, and worked at the laces of my boots. They were stiff, but my fingers, though cold, were steady. One boot came off, then the other. I watched them sink into the deep blue, disappearing into the darkness below. It felt like a small victory. I unbuckled my belt and wriggled out of my jeans, kicking them away. Now, in just my shirt and shorts, I felt lighter, more agile. I was no longer fighting my own clothes. I floated on my back for a moment, letting the sun warm my face as I took stock of my situation. This wasn't a hostile environment. It was just an environment. It had rules. Sun, wind, current. My training in reconnaissance and navigation took over. The sun was high but beginning its descent westward. That gave me my bearings. I licked a finger and held it up to the wind, a faint but steady breeze from the southeast. I let my body relax and felt the subtle but persistent pull of the current. It was moving northwest, a slow, lazy river within the ocean. A plan began to form in the cold, logical part of my brain that my training had built. Swimming 10 miles to shore was suicide. But I knew these waters. I had fished them for 40 years. About 5 miles to the northwest was the main shipping channel for vessels coming into the Keys. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was better than floating here waiting for a shark or for exhaustion to claim me. It was a target. It was a direction. It was hope disguised as a compass heading. The part of me that was a grieving father, a betrayed old man, was still screaming in that locked room in my head. The image of Mitchell's cold, dead eyes as he sped away was burned into my mind. The sheer monstrosity of it threatened to overwhelm me. But the Marine in me took control. In Force Recon, we were taught to compartmentalize. You put the fear, the anger, the pain into a box. You lock it. You deal with the mission. You can open the box later, if you survive. I created a new motto for myself, a variation on the old one. The Recon motto was swift, silent, deadly. Mine would be calm, efficient, alive. I would not waste a single movement, not a single calorie of energy. I began to swim. Not a frantic crawl, but a slow, measured breaststroke, keeping my head above water as much as possible to watch for any signs of a boat. I set a rhythm. Swim for 15 minutes. Float on my back for 5. Conserve energy. Maintain discipline. My muscles quickly began to ache, the salt stinging the scrapes on my hands. The sun beat down, and thirst became a dull throb in the back of my throat. But I ignored it. I focused only on the rhythm. Stroke, breathe, kick, glide. 15 minutes on 5 minutes off. It was a grueling, monotonous routine, but it was a routine. It was control. In a world where I had lost all control, this small act of discipline was all I had left. It was the only thing keeping me from becoming just another ghost in the endless blue. I was not a victim waiting to drown. I was a Marine on a mission, and Marines don't quit. The anger was still there, a hot, burning coal in my gut. Every time I thought of Mitchell's face, of his final cruel words, a fresh wave of rage would surge through me. For a moment I wanted to give in to it, to scream, until my lungs gave out, to thrash in the water, until I had nothing left. But what would that accomplish? I would die exhausted and full of hate, and Mitchell would win. He would get everything he wanted. He would sell the land, bulldoze the house, and erase every last trace of the life Isabel and I had built. He would desecrate her memory for money. And that thought, more than anything else, is what truly saved me. Suddenly a memory of Isabel bloomed in my mind, so vivid, it was almost painful. She was in the garden of our home, kneeling in the soft soil with dirt on her cheek, and a wide, beautiful smile on her face as she looked up at me. The sunlight caught in her hair, turning it to gold. "It's our paradise, Griff," she used to say. "Our own little piece of heaven on earth." That paradise was what my son was trying to steal. He wasn't just trying to kill me, he was trying to kill her memory too. And in that moment, floating alone in the vast, unforgiving ocean, I made a new vow. This was no longer just about survival. It was about justice. I would not let him win. I owed it to Isabel. I owed it to the 45 years of love and laughter we had shared in that home. The cold rage inside me didn't disappear. It crystallized. It sharpened into a single, unbreakable point of focus. My new mission was clear. I would live. I would get back to shore. And I would make sure the truth of what happened here today would see the light of day. Mitchell wanted to say hello to the sharks. Soon he would be saying hello to the consequences. Time in the open ocean is a strange thing. There are no clocks, no schedules, only the slow, indifferent movement of the sun across the sky. The first hour was fueled by adrenaline and cold rage. The second hour was a grim exercise in discipline. By the third hour, the true struggle began. The initial shock of the cold water had long since worn off, replaced by the relentless, energy-sapping chill that comes from prolonged immersion. My muscles, which had responded so well at first, began to burn with a deep, persistent ache. My shoulders screamed with every stroke. My legs felt like lead weights, and each kick was a monumental effort. The sun, which had once been a distant point of navigation, became a tormentor. It beat down on my exposed head and shoulders, cooking my skin. My lips were cracked, and my throat felt like it was coated in sand. The thirst was a physical presence, a clawing need that distracted me and made it hard to think. I would occasionally dip my head under the surface just to feel the coolness on my face, a fleeting moment of relief in a sea of discomfort. But the salt water was a cruel tease. It surrounded me, yet I couldn't drink a drop. It stung my eyes, making them red and blurry, and it chafed my skin raw under my arms and around my neck. My disciplined routine of swimming and floating began to fray at the edges. The 5-minute rests felt shorter and shorter, while the 15-minute swims stretched into an eternity. My mind, starved of stimulation and racked with fatigue, began to play tricks on me. I would see a dark shape on the horizon, and my heart would leap with hope only for it to be a cloud or a trick of the light. I heard the phantom sound of a boat engine, a low thrum just over the horizon, and I would waste precious energy treading water, craning my neck to see until the sound faded back into the whisper of the waves. Hopelessness was a patient predator circling just at the edge of my consciousness. It whispered to me during my floating rests. It told me the shipping lane was a fantasy. It told me no one was coming. It reminded me that I was a foolish old man clinging to a life that had already been stolen from him. I had to actively fight it, summoning the face of Gunnery Sergeant McKinnon, summoning the memory of Isabel's smile. I started talking to her out loud, my voice a hoarse croak. "Just a little farther, Izzy," I'd whisper. "Just gotta keep going for you." It felt crazy talking to a ghost in the middle of the ocean, but it was better than listening to the despair. A jellyfish, a translucent purple bell, drifted past me. I managed to avoid its main body, but one of its long, trailing tentacles brushed against my forearm. The pain was immediate and electric, a fiery lash that made me cry out. My arm lit up with a burning, throbbing agony, another layer of misery piled onto all the others. The pain broke my concentration, and for a terrifying minute I flailed, swallowing a mouthful of seawater. I choked, coughed, and fought off a fresh wave of panic. I forced myself to float on my back, breathing deeply, until the worst of the fire in my arm subsided into a dull, angry ache. The encounter left me shaken, a stark reminder that I was not just fighting the distance, but the ocean itself and everything in it. My strength was failing. Each stroke was harder than the last. The line between consciousness and a hazy, exhausted dream state was beginning to blur. I was losing the battle. My world had shrunk to a cycle of pain and endurance. Stroke, breathe, kick, glide. Float, rest, fight, despair. Repeat. I don't know how many hours had passed. The sun had begun its long, slow descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. My body was a single massive ache. My mind was a foggy haze drifting between memories of Isabel and the droning whispers of surrender. I was done. I had nothing left. I closed my eyes, ready to let the water take me, ready to join her. And that's when I heard it. At first I was sure it was another hallucination, a low rhythmic thrumming like a distant heartbeat. I'd heard it a dozen times before, and each time it had been a phantom, a cruel trick of my exhausted brain. I kept my eyes closed, refusing to fall for it again. But this time it didn't fade. It grew louder, steadier. It was the unmistakable, beautiful sound of a diesel engine. Hope is a violent thing. It slammed into me with the force of a physical blow, jolting me out of my stupor. I forced my eyes open. My vision was blurry, caked with salt. I blinked, trying to clear it, and then I saw it. It wasn't a mirage. It was a boat. A small, rusty fishing trawler maybe a mile away, chugging along parallel to my position. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. A final, desperate reserve of energy flooded my veins. I lifted a weak arm out of the water and waved my motions clumsy and slow. I tried to shout, but what came out was a dry, ragged croak. "Hey, over here, help!" It was barely a whisper, swallowed by the wind and the waves. The boat kept moving. No, not like this. I wouldn't come this far to fail now. I used every last ounce of my strength to push myself up in the water and wave both arms over my head, a frantic, pleading motion. And then the engine sound changed. The boat slowed. It was turning. It was turning towards me. The next few minutes were a blur. The trawler, whose name I could now see, painted on the side, Sea Dog, grew larger and larger until it was looming over me. A man with a weathered face, a thick gray beard and kind, worried eyes looked down from the sid. "Hang on, old-timer," he yelled. A life preserver on a rope splashed down a few feet away. I weakly swam to it, clinging on as he pulled me in. Rough, strong hands grabbed me under the arms and hauled my limp body over the side. I collapsed onto the hard, solid deck, the feeling of something solid beneath me so overwhelming that I almost wept. The fisherman, whose name was Sal, wrapped me in a thick, scratchy blanket and handed me a bottle of water. I drank greedily the cool liquid, a miracle on my parched throat. "What in God's name happened to you?" Sal asked, his voice a low grumble. Even in my exhausted, half-delirious state, my mind was racing. The truth was a weapon, and it needed to be deployed at the right time. Not now. I needed the element of surprise. I coughed, putting on a show of being dazed and confused. "The engine," I croaked, my voice hoarse. "My boat." The engine stalled. I went to the back to check it. I think a rogue wave hit us. Just knocked me clean overboard. I looked at him, trying to make my eyes look scared and lost. My son, Mitchell. He was at the helm. He might not have even noticed I was gone. He must be out of his mind with worry. "We have to call the Coast Guard." Sal nodded, his expression full of sympathy. The story was plausible. The sea was unpredictable. "We'll call him as soon as we get a signal," he said. "Don't you worry. We'll find your boy." As the boat chugged toward the shore, a new thought, cold and strategic, cut through my pain. I couldn't go back to the main marina. Mitchell would be there putting on his show. There would be authorities' questions. I needed to disappear. "Listen," I said to Sal, leaning forward. "I'm still in shock. The thought of all the chaos at the main dock, all the people, I can't face it. There's an old fishing pier in the next cove over, right? Could you just drop me there? I just need a quiet place to sit, to get my head straight, and make a phone call." Sal looked at me a little puzzled, but then he nodded. He probably thought I was just an old man in shock, not thinking clearly. He didn't know that for the first time in many hours, I was thinking with perfect ice-cold clarity. The rescue wasn't the end of my ordeal. It was the beginning of the war. Sal dropped me at the end of the rickety wooden pier as the last light of day faded from the sky. He gave me a final concerned look. "You sure you're gonna be all right, old-timer?" I nodded, forcing a weak smile. "I'll be fine. Just need a minute. Thank you, Sal. You saved my life." He grunted in acknowledgement and steered the Sea Dog back out into the cove, leaving me alone in the gathering twilight. The moment the boat was out of sight, my manufactured weakness vanished. Every muscle screamed in protest, but I forced myself to walk a steady, determined pace off the pier and onto the quiet coastal road. I was a ghost now. Griffin Hayes, the 71-year-old retiree, was officially lost at sea, presumed drowned. This new person, this survivor, needed to move without a trace. My first stop was a small 24-hour convenience store about a mile down the road. The fluorescent lights inside felt harsh and alien after hours spent under the open sky. I walked straight to the ATM in the corner. My bank card was still in my wallet, miraculously. I withdrew $300, the maximum daily limit. Cash was king for a man who didn't want to be found. Transactions leave a digital trail, a breadcrumb for Mitchell to follow if he ever got suspicious. Next, I bought a change of clothes from a rack of tourist apparel. A cheap t-shirt with a picture of a marlin on it, a pair of cargo shorts and flip-flops. I changed in the store's grimy restroom, stuffing my wet, salty clothes into a plastic bag. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized the man staring back. His face was burned red from the sun, his eyes were bloodshot and haunted, and his hair was matted with salt. He looked like a homeless drifter, which was perfect. No one would look twice at him. My most important purchase was a prepaid burner phone and a top-up card. I paid in cash, activated it right there in the parking lot, and then immediately turned it off. This phone was my new lifeline, a sterile connection to the world that couldn't be traced back to Griffin Hayes. Finally, I needed a place to lay low. Across the highway, the neon sign of a cheap motel. The Sandpiper Inn flickered weakly. It was the kind of place people go when they don't want to be seen. I paid the night clerk in cash for a room at the back. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and bleach, but it had a bed, a shower, and a lock on the door. It was a fortress. I collapsed onto the lumpy mattress, the events of the day crashing down on me in a wave of exhaustion and pain. I was alive. I was invisible. And for the first time since my son's betrayal, I was safe. The ghost was in his new haunt, and now the hunt could begin. I sat on the edge of the lumpy motel bed for a long time, the burner phone feeling heavy and cold in my hand. For this next step, I had only one option, one person in the world I could trust with my life and with the truth. Making this call was a risk. It was pulling someone else into the darkness with me. But I had no other choice. My war required a brilliant general, and I knew exactly who to call. Anya Sharma was more than just my lawyer. She had been Isabel's best friend since they were in college together. She was the maid of honor at our wedding and the godmother to Mitchell. Her loyalty wasn't just professional, it was personal. She loved Isabel, and I knew she would do anything to protect her memory. That was the trust I was counting on. I took a deep breath, turned the phone on, and dialed her private cell number from memory. It rang 3 times before she picked up. Anya Sharma speaking. Her voice was as crisp and professional as ever. Anya, I said, my own voice, a low, rough whisper. It's Griffin Hayes. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by a stunned silence. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, the disbelief warring with the recognition of my voice. Griff. My God. Is that really you? They said the Coast Guard called it off. Listen to me very carefully. I cut in my tone, leaving no room for argument. Don't ask questions. Not on the phone. I need to see you. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. There's a small diner called the Blue Heron about 30 miles south of town on Route 1. I need you to be there. Come alone. And Anya, tell absolutely no one. Not your staff, not your family, no one. This is a matter of life and death. Another silence, this one shorter, filled with a dawning understanding. When she spoke again, the shock in her voice had been replaced by steel. 10 o'clock. The Blue Heron. I'll be there, Griff. I ended the call without another word and turned the phone off. The first move had been made. Now I just had to pray it was the right one. The Blue Heron Diner was a relic from another time, a long, narrow building with red vinyl booths and a jukebox in the corner. It smelled of old coffee and frying bacon. I got there 20 minutes early and chose a booth at the very back one that gave me a clear view of the entrance. I sat with my back to the wall, a habit from my service days that had never left me. The waitress poured me a cup of black coffee, and I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic mug, watching the steam rise. I felt like a soldier waiting for a clandestine meeting in enemy territory. In a way, I was. Anya arrived at 10 o'clock sharp. She walked in looking as poised and professional as ever, in a dark pantsuit, but I saw her eyes scan the room with a nervous energy. When her gaze landed on me, she froze for a fraction of a second. The carefully constructed mask of a high-powered attorney slipped, revealing the shocked and deeply worried face of a friend. She quickly composed herself, walked over and slid into the booth across from me. "Griff," she whispered, her voice tight with emotion. "I couldn't believe it. I still can't." I didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Thank you for coming, Anya, and for being discreet." I looked into her eyes, and in a low, steady voice, I told her everything. I told her about the conversation on the boat, the argument over the land, the coldness in Mitchell's eyes. I described the shove, the feeling of hitting the water, and his final chilling words. I told her about the long hours in the ocean, my rescue by Sal, and the cover story I had invented. I laid out the facts like a field report, keeping my voice even, pushing down the rage and the pain that threatened to choke me. As I spoke, I watched Anya's face transform. Her initial shock melted into a look of pure horror. Her knuckles turned white as she clenched her fists on the table. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, her dark eyes blazing with an intensity that startled me. Her first words were not about the law or legal options. They were a low, furious hiss. "That monster. After everything you and Isabel did for him, everything she gave him, he would desecrate her memory like this." In that moment, I knew I had made the right choice. This wasn't just a case for her. It was personal. She was not just my lawyer. She was Isabel's avenger. Then, like a switch being flipped, her personal fury was channeled into a lethal professional focus. She leaned forward, her voice dropping even lower. "Okay, Griff. We are going to dismantle him. We are going to take him apart, piece by piece, legally and completely. But we have to be smart. We have to be disciplined." She began firing off questions. "Does Sal know the truth?" "No," I replied. "He thinks it was an accident." "Good. And no one else saw you come ashore?" "No one." "Excellent," she said, a grim satisfaction in her tone. "Your new job, Griff, is to remain a ghost. You don't exist. Let Mitchell think he's won. Let him get comfortable. Let him get arrogant. Arrogant people make mistakes." She continued, laying out the first steps of our counterattack. "I'm going back to my office and I'm going to pull every document related to your estate. The will, the power of attorney, everything. I'm especially interested in the irrevocable trust you and Isabel set up years ago. If I remember correctly, there's some very specific language in there about protecting the estate from harm. While you stay hidden, I will start digging. I'll look into his finances, his business partners, everything. We need to know exactly what kind of hole he's in." She looked me dead in the eye, her expression a mixture of grief and absolute determination. "He thinks he threw you to the sharks, Griff. He has no idea he just threw himself into the water with something far more dangerous. He's about to find out what happens when you threaten the legacy of Isabel Hayes." While Anya and I were plotting a war over lukewarm coffee in a roadside diner, my son was starring in a grand one-man play. I learned the details later, of course, pieced together from the official Coast Guard report and the accounts of people who were unfortunate enough to witness his masterful performance. He had apparently driven the boat, the Isabel, back to the main marina at full throttle. He didn't just dock. He crashed into the pier, a calculated bit of chaos to draw immediate attention. He leaped onto the dock before the boat was even tied, his face a mask of frantic despair. He was screaming before anyone could even ask what was wrong. "Help somebody, help! It's my dad! He's in the water!" People came running. The harbor master, other boat owners, tourists. Mitchell collapsed onto his knees on the wooden planks of the dock, holding his head in his hands, his body racked with fake theatrical sobs. He told them a story between gasps for air, a story of a beautiful day turned into a nightmare. He said I had been leaning over the side trying to fix a tangled line. He claimed he had just looked away for a second, just 1 second, and when he looked back, I was gone. "The current is so strong out there," he wailed, his voice cracking perfectly. "I circled for an hour, screaming his name. I couldn't find him." He made sure to blame himself, a clever touch to elicit sympathy. "I should have been watching him closer. He's 71, I should have known better." His performance was so convincing that people were patting his back, telling him it wasn't his fault, that the sea can be cruel. In front of this captive audience, he pulled out his phone and made a very public, very loud call to the Coast Guard. His voice was a masterpiece of panicked pleading, giving them our last known coordinates, and begging them to send everyone they could. He established himself on the official record as the distraught son who had done everything he could. His next call was to his wife Kendall. I can only imagine the crocodile tears he shed as he broke the news. He would have told her the plan had worked, but he would have done it in a voice choked with fake grief just in case anyone was listening. For the next few days, as the Coast Guard helicopters flew their search patterns and the cutters crisscrossed the ocean, Mitchell was the very picture of a grieving son. He spent hours at the marina staring out at the horizon with a haunted look. He spoke to a local news reporter, his voice thick with emotion, as he talked about what a wonderful father and pillar of the community I had been. He praised my service in the Marines and begged anyone with a boat to keep an eye out. He was building his alibi not with lies, but with a performance so audacious, so complete, that no one would ever think to question it. He was already burying me, and he was making sure he looked like the perfect, heartbroken son while he did it. 3 days later, the burner phone buzzed against the rickety nightstand. I picked it up on the first ring. It was Anya. I was expecting an update, a bit of information about Mitchell's finances. What I got was the sound of a predator who had just cornered its prey. There was a grim, triumphant excitement in her voice that sent a shiver down my spine. "Griff, I've got it," she said, her voice a low, focused hum. "I have our weapon. And it's better than I ever imagined. It's beautiful." Isabel was a genius. "What is it?" I asked, sitting up straighter. "Do you remember about 20 years ago when you two were doing your estate planning? We set up an irrevocable living trust to hold the title for the Keys property and your main investment accounts." I vaguely remembered. It was a blur of legal documents and confusing terminology. Isabel had been the one who insisted on it. She had a cousin who had lost his family home to a frivolous lawsuit, and she had become obsessed with protecting our legacy. "I remember," I said. "It was to protect the house, to make sure it always stayed in the family." "Exactly," Anya said, and I could almost hear her smiling. "It was to protect it from outside threats, creditors' lawsuits. But Isabel, bless her forward-thinking soul, insisted we add language to protect it from inside threats too. She was worried that after you were both gone, one of the grandchildren might try to force a sale. She wanted to make sure the property was ironclad." Anya took a breath, and I could sense she was getting to the kill shot. "The trust designates you as the sole trustee for your lifetime. You have complete control. Mitchell is listed as the primary beneficiary upon your death. He thinks that by getting rid of you, he automatically gets everything. But he's wrong. He's a beneficiary, Griff, not an owner. And his inheritance comes with terms and conditions. Very, very specific ones." I held my breath, waiting. "In the trust documents," Anya continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "Isabel had me draft one of the most aggressive in terrorem clauses I have ever seen. Do you know what that is? A terror clause, I asked. That's what the Latin means. Most people call it a no contest clause. Essentially, it's a legal booby trap. It's a provision in a will or a trust that states if a beneficiary challenges the terms, they are automatically disinherited. It's designed to discourage greedy relatives from suing the estate. But Isabel had us take it a step further. She was always fiercely protective. I could picture my wife sitting in Anya's office, her jaw set with determination, insisting on every word. Our clause, Anya said, the satisfaction in her voice as clear as a bell, states that any listed beneficiary who takes any action that directly or indirectly causes physical, financial, or emotional harm to the trustee, or who attempts to subvert the trustee's wishes and seize control of the trust's assets, is to be immediately, automatically, and permanently cut off. They forfeit all rights, all claims, all inheritance. It's as if they ceased to exist in the legal document. The weight of her words settled over me. It was a voice from the grave. A shield forged 20 years ago by my wife's love and foresight reaching out to protect me now. So what you're saying is... I began, my mind slowly connecting the dots. What I'm saying, Griff, Anya cut in, her voice now sharp as a razor, is that when Mitchell pushed you off that boat, he didn't just try to murder his father. In the cold, precise language of the law, he committed an act of direct physical harm against the trustee in an attempt to seize control of the trust's primary asset. He didn't just break the law of the land, he broke the law of the trust. He walked right into the legal trap Isabel set for him. By trying to steal his inheritance, he legally voided it. He disinherited himself right there 10 miles out at sea. He just doesn't know it yet. While Mitchell was playing the role of the bereaved son for the world, Anya became a ghost, just like me. She moved through the digital world with the quiet efficiency of a shark, and my cheap burner phone became the drop point for her findings. Each night, a new text would arrive, another piece of the ugly puzzle that was my son's life. I would sit in that dim, stale motel room and watch the truth unfold. The first texts were about his credit. Anya sent screenshots of his credit report, which was a sea of red flags. He had 6 different high-interest credit cards, all of them maxed out. The balances were staggering, tens of thousands of dollars spent on fancy dinners, designer clothes for Kendall, and expensive resorts. He was living a life funded entirely by debt, a house of cards waiting for the slightest breeze to knock it down. Then came the investment. Anya discovered that 3 months ago, Mitchell had sunk nearly all of his and Kendall's savings, over $100,000, into a risky tech startup. A week before he took me fishing, that startup had declared bankruptcy. The money was gone. All of it. He had been financially wiped out and hadn't told anyone. He was smiling and buying rounds of drinks for his friends while his financial world was burning to the ground. That explained the desperation, but it didn't explain the true darkness. The final piece came from a private investigator. Anya hired a discreet professional who specialized in digging into financial shadows. The investigator found a pattern of large, regular cash withdrawals and wire transfers. The transfers weren't going to other investments. They were going to offshore accounts associated with high-stakes online poker sites. Mitchell didn't just have a debt problem. He had a gambling problem. A serious one. As I stared at the numbers on my tiny phone screen, a cold, sick feeling washed over me. It wasn't shock. It was a profound and terrible sadness. It was the final confirmation of a weakness I had seen in him his whole life, a hunger for the easy win, a refusal to accept reality. I had bailed him out of smaller debts before thinking I was helping, thinking he would learn. But I hadn't been helping. I had been feeding the beast. The motive was now horribly clear. He wasn't just trying to unlock a future fortune. He was trying to outrun a past that was about to swallow him whole. And he was willing to kill his own father to do it. We now had the why, and it was uglier than I could have ever imagined. My first instinct was to act. We had the motive. We had the legal weapon Isabel had left for us. I wanted to march into town, find Mitchell, and confront him with everything we knew. I wanted to see the look on his face when his world came crashing down. But Anya, ever the strategist, held up a calming hand during our next phone call. "Patience, Griff," she said, her voice steady and firm. "Right now, the attempted murder is your word against his. He'll hire a slick lawyer who will try to paint you as a confused old man who fell overboard. But Mitchell thinks he's won. He's arrogant. And arrogant people always overplay their hand. We need to let him." I didn't understand at first. "Let him what? Let him get away with it?" "No," Anya replied, a cold satisfaction in her voice. "We're going to let him commit another crime. A crime on dry land. A crime that leaves a beautiful, undeniable paper trail. Right now, he's waiting for the Coast Guard to officially call off the search. As soon as they do, I guarantee he will file a petition to have you declared legally dead. He needs that death certificate to get his hands on the estate." The cold, brutal logic of her plan settled in. It was painful. It meant I had to stay hidden, a ghost, while my own son danced on my grave and tried to steal my life's work. It meant I had to watch him lie to the world, to our family, and desecrate the memory of his mother. But Anya was right. Mitchell's greed would be his own undoing. We wouldn't just accuse him of a crime, we would let him hand us the evidence of a new one on a silver platter. So we waited. We set the trap, and then we faded into the shadows to watch. All he had to do was be himself, and his own arrogance would make him walk right into it. It took 2 full weeks. 2 weeks of hiding in that dingy motel room, living on bad coffee and cheap takeout. 2 weeks of watching the local news, seeing my own sun-weathered face flash on the screen as the missing boater. Each day was a lesson in patience, a slow, agonizing wait, while the wheels of the official process turned. Anya called me every evening with a brief, quiet update. "They're still searching Griff. Just hold on, he'll get impatient." She was right. On the 15th day, the news anchor reported it with a somber expression. The Coast Guard had officially suspended the active search for Griffin Hayes. They offered their condolences to the family and declared me lost at sea, another tragic statistic. That was the signal. That was the green light Mitchell had been waiting for. From Anya's perspective inside the county legal system, she could see things I couldn't. She described it to me as watching a predator, fat and confident, finally emerge from the shadows to claim its prize. The very next morning, a mere 12 hours after the search was called off, Mitchell and Kendall walked into the county clerk's office. Anya had an old friend working there who watched the whole thing. She said they looked the part perfectly. Dressed in black, their faces etched with practiced sadness. Kendall even carried a tissue to dab at her dry eyes. Mitchell presented the official Coast Guard report and a sworn affidavit. He solemnly told the clerk about my age, my supposed health conditions, a slight heart murmur he'd exaggerated into a major risk factor, and the tragic, unavoidable nature of the accident. He painted a picture of a loving son who had lost his hero and was now reluctantly forced to handle the necessary legal affairs. He formally petitioned the court for a presumptive death certificate. Anya explained the legal weight of this document. It was more than just a piece of paper. It was a key. With it, Mitchell could unlock everything. He could go to the bank's access accounts and, most importantly, present himself as the rightful heir and new executor of my estate. It was the linchpin of his entire plan. But it was also his fatal mistake. What he saw as a finish line was actually a tripwire. Every word on that petition was a lie. Every signature was an act of fraud. He wasn't just being greedy anymore. He was now committing a felony, a serious prosecutable offense against the state. He was creating a document trail, a series of official lies that could be easily disproven the moment I decided to stop being a ghost. When Anya called to tell me the petition had been filed, there was no celebration in her voice, only a cold, hard finality. "The trap is sprung, Griff," she said. "He's done it. He's officially lied to a court of law. We have him now. We have him on fraud on top of everything else. I felt a profound aching sadness. My son, my own flesh and blood, was so lost, so consumed by his demons, that he was willing to sign a legal document declaring me dead, while I was still breathing, all for the sake of money. The waiting was over. Now it was time to prepare for the reckoning. A little over a month after I was left for dead, my son threw a party in my house. It wasn't a loud, boisterous party, but a quiet, self-congratulatory celebration of a victory he believed he had won. Anya's investigator had to contact a caterer working the event, who told us everything. The scene he described was one of profound desecration. Mitchell and Kendall were hosting two other people in the living room, the one overlooking the sea where Isabel had arranged the furniture just so. A sleek modern architect in a black turtleneck was there, along with a woman in a sharp business suit from the Vesta Development Group. They weren't drinking beer. They were drinking expensive champagne, the kind Mitchell couldn't possibly afford, served in my wife's crystal flutes. My old comfortable leather armchair, the one I'd sat in every evening for 30 years, had been pushed into a corner, and a large architectural blueprint was spread out across the antique coffee table Isabel had inherited from her grandmother. Kendall, dressed in a tight black dress, was laughing a high, brittle sound that didn't belong within those walls. She pointed at a section of the blueprint. "And the infinity pool will go right here," she said. "The view will be absolutely spectacular once we get rid of all these overgrown sea grape trees." The trees my wife had planted and nurtured with her own hands. Mitchell, looking confident and relaxed in a ridiculously expensive cashmere sweater, had his arm draped casually around Kendall's shoulders. He swirled the champagne in his glass. "It's all about maximizing the footprint," he said, using the corporate jargon he loved so much. "The current structure is a complete teardown, of course. Sentimental value doesn't exactly translate to market value." He said it with a smirk, getting a polite chuckle from the architect and the executive. The caterer noted how they treated the house not as a home but as a temporary inconvenience. Kendall had already replaced Isabel's hand-stitched throw pillows with soulless gray cushions. A small, beautiful watercolor of a heron that Isabel had painted was gone from the mantelpiece, replaced by a tasteless, abstract metal sculpture. They were erasing us. They were scrubbing away our lives, our love, our history, before the ink on my death certificate was even dry. The woman from Vesta raised her glass. "Well, here's to a smooth transition," she said, her smile all business. "We're very excited about the Maxwell-Vesta partnership. This property is the crown jewel of our new resort." "To the future," Mitchell toasted, clinking his glass against hers. "And to leaving the past where it belongs." They drank to that. They drank to my death. They drank to the destruction of my home. They sat there, 4 people in my living room, plotting the demolition of a life's work, laughing and sipping champagne. They were so sure they had won. They were comfortable, arrogant, and completely blind to the storm that was gathering just outside their door. They had no idea that a ghost from the past was about to walk into their perfect future and burn it to the ground. The party, my caterer source told me, was just getting started when the doorbell rang. Kendall let out an audible sigh of annoyance, placing her champagne flute down with a delicate clink. "Honestly, who could that be?" she complained to the room at large, as if the doorbell were a personal affront to her celebration. "The caterer is already here. Probably a delivery for a neighbor." She smoothed down her dress and walked to the front door, her heels clicking on the hardwood floors that she already considered her own. She pulled the heavy oak door open with an impatient flick of her wrist, a bored, dismissive expression already on her face. And then she froze. The man standing on the porch was not a delivery driver. He was old, gaunt, and weathered, with skin tanned the color of dark leather and burned raw in patches across his cheeks and forehead. He was thinner than she remembered, as if the sea had stripped away every ounce of softness from him, leaving only hard angles and bone. His clothes, a cheap t-shirt and cargo shorts, hung loosely on his frame. But it was his eyes that made her blood run cold. They were the same piercing blue eyes she had always known, but all the warmth was gone. They were flat, cold, and ancient, like chips of glacial ice. They looked at her and right through her with an expression of absolute final judgment. For a full second, her brain simply refused to process the information. It was an impossibility, a ghost on the doorstep in the late afternoon sun. Her painted smile faltered, twitching at the corners. The color drained from her face, leaving her foundation looking like a pale, chalky mask. The champagne flute she was still holding slipped from her nerveless fingers and shattered on the stone porch, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. "What is it, honey?" Mitchell called out from the living room, his voice syrupy with champagne and self-satisfaction. "Tell them to leave it on the porch." Kendall didn't answer. She couldn't. She just stood there, her mouth slightly agape, a small strangled gasp caught in her throat. Mitchell let out an exasperated sigh and got up from the couch. "Honestly, the incompetence," he muttered, walking toward the entryway. He came up behind Kendall, putting a hand on her shoulder. "What's the problem?" he asked, his gaze following hers to the man on the porch. The first emotion on Mitchell's face was simple irritation, then a flicker of confusion. Who was this old vagrant? Then came the recognition. It was a slow-motion tidal wave of horror that washed over his features, erasing a month of arrogance and triumph in a single devastating moment. His jaw went slack. The confident, relaxed posture he'd been holding all afternoon collapsed as if his strings had been cut. His face, which had been flushed with alcohol and success, turned a ghastly, sallow white. His eyes widened, not just in shock, but in a kind of primal, superstitious terror. He was looking at a dead man. He was looking at the impossible. "No," he whispered the word barely audible. He shook his head slightly, as if trying to clear a terrible mirage. It can't be." I said nothing. I just held his gaze, letting the silence stretch, letting him drown in the reality of my presence. I wanted him to feel the full weight of his failed crime crashing down on him. I wanted him to understand that his perfect future had just evaporated. Cha. He stammered, his voice the reedy, terrified squeak of a child caught in a monstrous lie. You're alive. Oh my God, it's a miracle, it's a miracle." He started to put on the act, the muscle memory of his deception kicking in, but it was a pathetic, transparent performance. His eyes weren't filled with relief. They were filled with the sheer terror of a cornered animal. I took a slow step forward, crossing the threshold into my home. Kendall flinched back as if I were a leper. The architect and the executive in the living room were now on their feet, their champagne flutes frozen halfway to their lips, staring at the unfolding drama with confused fascination. I walked right past my son and his wife, my gaze sweeping over the blueprints on the coffee table, the new soulless pillows on the couch, the empty space on the mantelpiece where my wife's painting used to hang. I looked at the champagne bottle chilling in a silver bucket, the half-eaten hors d'oeuvres. A funeral feast. Finally, I turned back to face my son, who was still standing by the door, trembling, his mind utterly broken. I looked him dead in the eye, and my voice, when it came out, was not the voice of the father he knew. It was the voice of the man who had survived the ocean. A voice scraped raw by salt and stripped of all warmth. "There was no miracle, Mitchell," I said, my words dropping into the silent room like stones into a deep, dark well. "There is only the truth. You left a gift for me out there in the ocean. Now, I have a gift for you too." The words hung in the air, heavy and cold, sucking all the oxygen from the room. My gift for him. The friendly, celebratory atmosphere of the party evaporated, replaced by a silence so profound you could hear the frantic pounding of my son's heart. Mitchell's pathetic attempt to feign relief vanished, replaced by the raw, naked terror of a man whose worst nightmare had just walked through his front door. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, but no sounds came out. The gears of his deceitful mind had finally ground to a halt. Kendall, who had been frozen by the door, let out a small whimpering sound. She looked back and forth between me and her husband, her eyes wide with panic, finally understanding that the dream life she had been toasting just moments before was now a pile of ash. The architect and the woman from Vesta Development stood awkwardly by the coffee table, their champagne flutes still in hand. They looked at each other, their expressions a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. They had walked into what they thought was a business meeting and had stumbled into the middle of a grim family apocalypse. The woman, ever the professional, tried to salvage the situation. "Perhaps," she said, her voice strained, "we should come back at a better time. You should stay." I said, my voice quiet, but carrying an authority that made them both freeze in place. "You're part of this. You're the reason he was in such a hurry." I took another slow step into the room, my eyes never leaving Mitchell's. I was a general on a battlefield of my own choosing, and he was a routed soldier with nowhere left to run. "You put on quite a show, son," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion, except a cold, hard finality. "The grieving son. The tragic accident. You almost had me convinced." "Dad, please." Mitchell finally managed to choke out, taking a stumbling step toward me. "I don't know what you're talking about. I was so worried I thought you were. You thought I was dead." I finished for him, my voice like ice. "You counted on it. You signed the papers. You popped the champagne. You started carving up my life before my body was even cold." Each word was a hammer blow, and I could see him physically flinch with each one. The lies were gone. The act was over. There was only the ugly truth left exposed and rotting in the middle of my living room. As my final words settled in the silent room, the doorbell rang again, a sharp, piercing sound that made everyone flinch. Mitchell, in a desperate search for any kind of lifeline, looked toward the door, as if a miracle might be waiting on the other phone. "You should get that," I said calmly. "I believe it's for you." I didn't wait for him to move. I walked to the front door myself, my steps steady on the hardwood floors. I opened it wide. Standing on the porch was Anya Sharma, her face a mask of cold, professional resolve. She was not alone. Flanking her were two men in plain suits, who had the unmistakable, hard-eyed look of law enforcement. The architect and the executive from Vesta saw them and visibly shrank, trying to melt into the expensive furniture. They now understood this was not a family squabble. This was a crime scene. Anya walked in first, her presence commanding the room. She was holding a thick leather briefcase. She didn't spare a glance for Mitchell or Kendall. Instead, she walked directly to the coffee table and placed her briefcase on top of the blueprints, symbolically crushing their fantasy future under the weight of the law. She opened it and pulled out a thick file folder, placing it on the table with a soft but definitive thud. She finally turned her gaze to Mitchell, and her eyes were merciless. "Mitchell Hayes," she began, her voice crisp and formal, cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "My name is Anya Sharma. I am the legal counsel for the Hayes Family Trust. This," she said, tapping a document on the top of the file, "is a certified copy of the petition you filed 2 weeks ago to have your father, Griffin Hayes, declared legally dead in a court of law. As you can see, your father is standing right here. This document, signed by you under penalty of perjury, constitutes felony fraud." Kendall let out a horrified sob. Mitchell just stared, his face ashen, his mind clearly unable to process the speed of his own destruction. But Anya wasn't finished. She pulled out a second, thicker document bound in a blue cover. "And this is the founding charter of that trust. The one your mother and father established 20 years ago. I'd like to draw your attention to Article 4, Section B, the in terrorem clause. Your mother was very specific about its wording. It states, and I quote, 'Should any beneficiary engage in any action that causes direct physical harm to the trustee in an attempt to subvert the trustee's authority or seize control of the trust's assets, that beneficiaries' rights and claims to any and all inheritance shall be immediately and permanently nullified. By pushing your father from that boat to steal his house, Mitchell, you legally disinherited yourself. You get nothing. You can't prove that. Mitchell finally blurted out, his voice a desperate, cracking shout. It's his word against mine. He's an old man. He fell. It was a tragic accident. I let him finish his pathetic denial. Then I slowly shook my head. You're right, son, I said, my voice quiet. A person's word can be tricky. It's better to have something more reliable. I always did love technology. I reached into my pocket and took out the small, salt-stained personal GPS tracker. I placed it gently on the table next to Anya's files. This device was in my pocket the entire time, I explained. It tracks my location once every minute. It shows a very interesting story. It shows the boat, the Isabel, traveling 10 miles out to sea. It shows it stopping for approximately 8 minutes. And then it shows the boat returning to shore, leaving my tracker and me behind in the middle of the ocean. Mitchell's eyes were locked on the small black device as if it were a venomous snake. His last ounce of fight seemed to drain out of him. Then one of the detectives spoke for the first time, his voice calm and matter-of-fact. He held up a clear plastic evidence bag. Inside was the small waterproof audio recorder I always clipped to the inside of my vest. We recovered this from your father's clothing, Mr. Hayes, the detective said. The digital audio file is perfectly preserved. We heard the entire conversation, the argument about the property, your father's final refusal. He paused, letting the weight of his next words land with surgical precision. And we have a very clear recording of you telling him to say hello to the sharks. That was it. That was the final blow. The sound that came out of Mitchell's throat was not human. It was a strangled, guttural sob of absolute and total defeat. His legs gave out and he crumpled to the floor. Kendall erupted into hysterical, wailing sobs, crying not for her husband, but for the life of luxury that had just been ripped away from her. The two detectives stepped forward, their movements efficient and practiced. They pulled Mitchell to his feet. The only sound in the room was Kendall's weeping and the quiet final click of the handcuffs locking around my son's wrists. The trial was a quiet, somber affair. There was no grand drama, no shocking revelations. There was only the cold, hard evidence laid out piece by piece for the jury to see. Anya presented the case with a calm, surgical precision. The fraudulent death certificate was displayed on a large screen for the court to see my son's signature clear as day. The GPS data from my tracker was shown as an animated map, a digital recreation of my boat's lonely journey back to shore without me. But the most damning evidence was the audio recording. Anya played it in the silent courtroom. The sound of my son's voice, clear and cold, telling me to say hello to the sharks, echoed off the wooden walls. It was the sound of a soul completely devoid of compassion. Mitchell's defense was pathetic. His lawyer tried to argue that it was a misunderstanding, a joke gone horribly wrong. But there is no way to misunderstand the sound of a boat engine speeding away. There is no way to misinterpret the weeks of lies that followed. The jury was out for less than an hour. Mitchell was found guilty on all counts: attempted murder, felony fraud. He was sentenced to 25 years in a state penitentiary. Kendall, found guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud, received a lighter sentence of 3 years. I did not attend the sentencing. There was no victory in watching my son's life end. There was only a profound, bottomless tragedy. He had built his own prison long before the judge handed down the sentence. In the months that followed, Anya and I worked to rebuild. The first step was to formally restructure the Hayes Family Trust. With the stroke of a pen, Mitchell's and Kendall's names were permanently removed as beneficiaries. They were legally erased from the legacy they had tried to steal through murder. The question then was what to do with the future of the estate. The idea of leaving it to anyone else felt wrong, tainted by what had happened. The wealth that had so corrupted my son needed to be repurposed, to be turned into something that honored the woman whose love was its true source. So we created the Isabel Hayes Foundation. It became the new and sole beneficiary of the trust. Its mission was twofold. A portion of the funds would go to support the families of Marine veterans, a nod to the discipline and brotherhood that had saved my life. The other portion would be dedicated to marine conservation programs in the Florida Keys, a way of giving back to the ocean that had tested me but had ultimately spared me. The house, the land, the money. It was no longer an inheritance to be fought over. It was now a tool for good, a living monument to my wife's generous spirit. Her legacy would now be one of charity and preservation, a final beautiful triumph over the greed that had tried to extinguish it. I am back in the house by the sea now. My house. I am sitting on the porch in the same old chair watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of orange and gold. The sea is calm today, its surface like polished steel. It is not an enemy. It is not a graveyard. It is just the sea. I feel no anger. I feel no thirst for revenge. That fire burned out long ago, replaced by something quieter, something deeper. It is the feeling of peace. The peace that comes from doing the right thing no matter how hard. The peace that comes from protecting those you love. I did not save the house for myself. I saved it for her. For Isabel. Her memory lives in the whisper of the sea breeze through the grape trees she planted in the warmth of the setting sun on the porch where we dreamed our future. I have done my duty. I have honored my wife, and in the gentle rhythmic sound of the waves washing ashore, I can almost hear her laughing. This story taught me a hard lesson. Greed is a cancer of the soul. It can twist a person you love into an unrecognizable monster, making them believe that a shortcut to wealth is worth more than a lifetime of love and respect. But it also taught me that true strength isn't just in our bodies, but in our convictions. The legacy we build with love and honor is the only thing that truly endures. It is a fortress that no amount of money can buy, and no act of betrayal can ever truly demolish. That is the real inheritance. What would you have done in my shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'm curious to know how you would have sought your justice. And if you believe that honor and legacy are more important than money, please like this video and subscribe for more stories like this one.
언니 이거. 에? 뭐야? 잡았나봐. 잡았어.
一传一万遍就会传成10个的。
假如有爱情，假如有，哇，传的好快！我跟你讲，上次在香港买了好几个节目。
여기가 먼지통 잡은 것 같은데?
여기 왜 초록색 들고 있지?
打走路开花看你面上画的一个。
아니야.
이거 가짜야, 포카칩이야.
근데 그러면은 우리가 여기를 잡으면은